In 1967, the Beatles released their album Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, and my friend Doc and I are going to talk about it on this episode of Records with Ray. And today we're going to talk about Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band from the Bee Gees.
Yeah, the Robert Stigwood production, 1978.
Now you said that this
an absolute masterpiece.
Now you're saying that this is your favorite album of all time. No, I'm just kidding. It's your favorite album from the Beatles.
No, that soundtrack is one of my favorite albums of all time.
Is that right?
Well, our journey to Pepperland begins with, this movie came out in 1978. Okay, so I'm a kid, and this movie was on every time it came on. I grew up with Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, the movie, as a kid. That's how I was introduced to all those songs. But it was the Bee Gees singing Sgt. Pepper's. It was Peter Frampton singing A Little Help from My Friends. It was Alice Cooper singing Because. George Martin, Maxwell Silverhammer. Aerosmith doing Come Together. It was all these. That's how I was introduced to Sgt. Pepper's. I mean, I knew that my mom and my dad told me, they go, no, this is the Beatles. And, throughout my childhood, I would occasionally hear those versions of those songs. But the sentimental value attached, how that whole world of the Beatles, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band opened up, was from this movie, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, the movie. And now that I'm older, and I have since discovered the album Sgt. Pepper's, now when I look back on this album, all I do is fantasize about how high the people involved were in making this movie. I can only imagine that party. This is what happens when you have an unlimited amount of cocaine and an unlimited budget. I can just imagine that meeting. Okay, we're going to have George Burns singing Fixing a Hole. It's going to be great. He's going to be Mr. Kite. Okay, we're going to get the Bee Gees in there. Alice Cooper, I think he's heading into rehab, but we'll get him to do a really great fucking version of Because. And Aerosmith, you're going to do Come Together, and we'll get a girl singing Strawberry Fields. She's going to be Strawberry Fields. Okay, and we're gonna get
and
Lucy.
Everyone else is coked up too. So
and everybody's
like,
coked up.
That's a good idea.
Yeah, and somewhere in there let's get Lucy in the Sky. They'll be like a band. And Peter Frampton, just make sure he's got his shirt off, and fucking great. And they made it happen. Because that reminds me of every idea. I've had those ideas. Where you're at 3 o'clock in the morning, high as a kite, going, this is a wonderful idea. Why didn't anybody else think of this?
Okay, thinking about crazy ideas and being high on drugs, let's talk about the actual original Sgt. Pepper's, because the name of the album, it's a little confusing, kind of.
Well,
because what wasn't the idea they want? They're like,
Paul McCartney wanted a fantasy band.
He wanted a fantasy band.
He's like, let's do the band that's playing this is going to be characters. He had this idea of this Edwardian military band, and they're gonna do the album. It's the Beatles kind of presents, here's Sgt. Pepper's. We're all going to be a character. And of course, this was Paul McCartney at his zenith of the songwriting. He pretty much did half those songs. Ringo Starr basically learned how to play chess. George Harrison was fucking in sitar land. He was tired of being fab. John Lennon was probably getting this motherfucker's taking the lion's share of the songwriting. I'm doing the short order stuff. But that was the idea of Sgt. Pepper's from its inception. I think it was after Brian Epstein died, they came back and they did a few songs. They did Strawberry Fields and Penny Lane, and I want to say they did another song. But they wrote those songs, and I think those were originally supposed to be on Pepper, but they released them as a single.
Yeah. Well, eventually they were on Magical Mystery Tour.
They eventually became, and Magical Mystery Tour was supposed to be a soundtrack to a movie they did after Pepper. And then I think America.
And that movie actually happened.
It did happen.
Yeah.
It was after Sgt. Pepper, and they weren't expecting it because I guess Strawberry Fields and the Penny Lane did bad. I guess it didn't do as good as they were expecting. It was the first song that didn't hit the top. It didn't hit number one. So they're like, "Oh, the Beatles thing is over." And meanwhile, they're over there with a fantasy band in Abbey Road planning this freaking, a fake band with vaudeville, big hall music, circus music, ragtime music. They're using, you got George Martin in there basically presenting the studio as an instrument. They invented techniques in recording that album that people still use today. They invented the term the flange, because at the time there was this trick, I think it was called ADT. It was double tracking your vocals.
Yeah.
Because before that, you had to double track your vocals, and it had to be perfect. And then they invented this trick where they could just double it. And then George Martin went up to John Lennon and goes, hey, we're going to have this 90-second delay on your voice. It's going to be this. It's going to be a splish-splosh flange. That term flange is used today as an effect term,
Did when they made Sgt. Pepper's, what was the last album that they toured with?
I want to say, and that was
that Rubber Soul?
That was another. I want to say,
or was it Revolver?
I want to say Revolver. That was another reason why the album Sgt. Pepper happened, because they wanted to do an album that they couldn't reproduce live. The band as a whole, intentionally, the band as a whole was so sick of touring.
Yeah,
it was no fun for them. They basically said they could fill up a stadium and put waxworks of us on stage, and it would still be a big seller, because that may as well be what happened. Because back then they didn't have, PAs that could handle a stadium. They were just thinking, we gotta have a stadium, and we're gonna use what we have.
Yeah.
And the people screaming was louder than anything that was coming off the stage, and they were sick.
Well, that's the thing that always kind of killed me, like that whole Beatlemania thing, where I've never been to a show where everyone is just constantly screaming. Have you? And the weird thing about all these Beatles shows, and I mean, maybe it was a thing from like the 50s and the 60s where you just had this constant roar of people.
Yeah. Back then, I think it was a problem because literally they didn't have a PA that could address that situation. It was people were so. You still have people yelling, but you have a PA that you can actually hear what the band's doing now.
Yeah.
Then they didn't care about. I mean, it's not that they didn't care about the music, but it's just like you're there. I think that's what Beatlemania was. You're looking at them, and
I honestly think that
that'll never happen.
I think back then, a lot of people were pretty much starstruck.
Yeah.
Holy shit! There's John Lennon. Oh my God! There he is. There is Paul McCartney. I mean, fast forward to, and then you're talking about like the only exposure you would have saw would have been like, okay, there's a picture of them in some magazine, or maybe they're on on the Ed Sullivan show that one time.
That thing still does happen. That starstruck thing, and you got to imagine a stadium full of people getting starstruck.
Yeah.
Everybody reacts a different way. I didn't meet, but I was your distance from me from Ringo Starr.
Really?
I did the Ringo All-Star Band. It's a true story. And I was at the Chateau Ste. Michelle, and I was eating lunch. And you eat lunch in the same quarters as the band sometimes. And I heard the voice. I heard Ringo Starr. And I just heard him, and I was like... And my boss noticed how freaked out I was.
I would have been like that. Like chill going up your spine. Or you're
it was. You hear the voice, and then you look over, and there's Ringo Starr. Like, you're Ringo Starr. And I'm like, oh my God. And they're sitting at a table, and I'm just looking at his back. Funny story. This is the best part of this. He turns around, and I didn't want to make eye contact with him and make things weird. He's got that lead singer from Men at Work, Colin Hay, sitting right next to him with the fucked up floating eye. So I just immediately look at his face, and he's staring. I think he's staring at me.
One of the eyes is looking at you.
So that I don't make eye contact with Ringo Starr and make a fool out of myself. But now I'm looking at Colin Hay.
But you're making eye contact with
and his eyes are going in either direction, and I'm just like, I'm making it weird regardless. That's my Beatles story. That's as close as I got to a Beatle. Was Ringo Starr right there, too afraid to make eye contact or say anything, and then I'm just staring at who can it be now? And that whole thing's happening. So when they
one thing I always wondered, like when the Beatles were doing Sgt. Pepper's, they knew that they were never going to tour again.
They were not planning on touring again.
But did the audience, did the fans know that?
The fans didn't know. They had taken a break. Okay. You see, they weren't together. You got to understand, up until that point, I think it was just Beatlemania. It was like Ed Sullivan, and it was just Beatles for let's see, this is 67, 66, 60, yeah, so this would be 66.
Yeah.
So you gotta understand, it's just 3 years of them releasing singles, album, movies, Hard Day's Night, Help, blah, blah, blah. It's not stop. And then they take a break. I think John Lennon was making a movie.
I remember that,
They went, Brian Epstein, their manager, died. They went over with the Maharishi, the yogi. They started, the meditation stuff. They were, they went to Sitar Land, and they were doing that. And then they came back, and their manager died. And I want to say they wrote "I Am the Walrus" like immediately after that. That's when they started getting into this idea of transforming things and doing all these different things. But the big deal with Sgt. Pepper's was Paul wanted to make an album with a fake band. This is how I understand it. And they had no interest in touring. They had no interest in playing live shows. They had an unlimited budget. They were going to go into Abbey Road, and they were going to create a masterpiece. And it was like when George Lucas was making Star Wars. People were like, what the hell are they doing with this money?
Yeah, I was going to ask you. I mean, it's like, so the album gets released. What did people think of it? What was the original
What do I think people, when that album came out, they went from She Loves You, Yeah, 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 to A Day in the Life. The Sound of the Fucking Apocalypse.
Yeah.
In the Summer of Love, you had an album with, it starts off with Sgt. Pepper's. It's like a concept album. It was the first album where a song crossfaded into another one. So it was like you were watching this show, but you were going to these different planets. You go in from Billy Shears, and then What Would You Do? You got a different person singing a song. And then it goes into Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. You start off with that.
And every song is completely different.
It's different. You got that tambora, it's like that droning hippie sound. It's like the sound I hear when I see a beautiful hippie girl, like at a solstice festival, and then she raises her arms and she's got hairy armpits and freaking turned off. But you got Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds that shoots into, getting better, and then
she's leaving home.
She's leaving home. You got that beautiful harp, and it's just this, and then you got this circus show for the benefit of Mr. Kite, and that all the effects that all the work that they did to get into, and that's just side one. I mean, you've already gone from like an orchestra pit warming up into this rock show, introducing this band that's the Beatles, but they're playing music that you haven't heard them play. Introduce a guy named Billy Shears, and then you're in Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. It's like you're going from frickin' the New Orleans Square to Frontierland to Tomorrowland to Fantasy. You're just going to all these. What the hell's happening? And this is the Summer of Love. What's everybody on? Drugs. Yeah. You listen to this album, by the time you get to frickin' for the benefit of Mr. Kite, you are permafried. You're stuck in the Summer of Love, and you haven't even gotten to side 2 yet.
Let's talk about side 2.
George Harrison,
which is my favorite side of it.
You start with
Within Without
You. It starts with the I believe, what is that? Tambora, the sitar.
Yeah. And it wasn't. I mean, you gotta understand. Even at that point, he's done other songs before that.
Oh yeah, he wrote.
"Love You Too" is on Revolver and stuff like that. So it wasn't that much of a shock. But but I personally love. My favorite part of the album is "Lovely Rita Made."
Psychedelic.
Into Good Morning, into A Day in the Life. Those 3 songs is just like
A Day in the Life. I have a top 5 moments. It's not even a top 5 songs.
Yeah.
I have a top 5 moments.
Moments
in music.
Okay.
That still, no matter how many times I have heard it. It could be in a film, but it's like, Randy Rhoads' guitar solo in Diary of a Madman. We're talking just moments and pieces of music that still bring chills. I have chills in my spine when I think about it. And the dream sequence in A Day in the Life is one of the most beautiful, I think it's like 16 measures.
You're talking about Get Up, Get Out of Bed.
Get Up, no. But when he goes, and then I went into a dream, and then it goes into that.
That's what you're talking about.
There's a thing that happens in there. Okay, so because you've got this harrowing song. It's a pretty dark song that it starts out with,
Yeah.
And it's beautifully done. It's I have tried so hard to recreate that song, like with my own music. You know, I go out there going, this is going to be my day in the life. But then by the time it's finished, it may as well be We Built This City. You know? I went in there going to get day in the life, and now I got a fucking Starship song. So I guess that's out. But you have this harrowing song, and then you got this build-up. What the fuck's going on here? Nobody had ever heard anything like that before. You know, they've got a full orchestra doing this, and you got Paul McCartney. He orchestrated, I believe it was John Lennon. He said, I want it to sound like this fucking The Apocalypse.
Wow.
And then you go into this, woke up, got out of this happy. You're in Happy Land again. Dun, 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 you know, and then it goes into that dream sequence.
Yeah.
And what I love most about it is because you're still in Happy Land with this beautiful melody. Ah, ah. And then when that brass quartet comes in, that is the sound of the fucking apocalypse.
Yeah.
I still listen to it to this day, and I'm sorry, it is heavier than anything a metal band has put out. That part right there is just pure power. And it's like, I just imagine all these happy people singing, but the apocalypse is fucking looming. And it's just this real powerful moment in music history. And then it just goes towards the end, and then you got that other build-up, and then you got that piano chord. There has never been a song that's done that to me. And that song is the perfect ending to that album, because it's like you've had this fake band playing the whole time. They reprise it with Sgt. Pepper's.
Yeah.
And then they shatter the fucking illusion of Pepperland with this, like, reality. The production alone, the things they did, the experimentation, and that's where that album, I think, falls on, you know, every top 10 list, because it wasn't just the songwriting involved, it was also the production, the creative forces that all made that thing happen. That album was released 10 years before I was born, and it's made more of an impact than anything that came out in my age. But it all started with this. The Bee Gees.
It all started with the Bee Gees.
Peter Frampton. Earth, Wind, and Fire. Got to get you out of my life.
I hate the 70s.
So I have to thank my love for the Beatles and the songwriting genius of McCartney and John Lennon, because this fine... I mean, if you haven't seen George Martin sing Maxwell Silverhammer, well, you're just letting the best of life pass you by.
That's how we.
Did I say George Martin?
You said George Martin.
Steve Martin. See.
Steve Martin. No, George Burns.
George Burns sang Fixing a Hole. He was Mr. Kite.
It is so in the 70s.
And Steve Martin sang Maxwell Silverhammer.
Oh my God.
It was brilliant. But again, what I like about it now is I just think about how high everybody was. I just think about that fucking... What is this? Universal... They had a board meeting at Universal, and they just put a line of Coke right across the table. You know, they had this mile-long table at Universal. All right, by the time we get to the end of that table, we're going to have a movie.
They did.
And they did! And it changed my fucking life. I love it. Thanks for having me on, Ray.
Thanks. Hey gang, this is Ray, and I just want to say thank you very much for checking out my video. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you want to see more videos, please click on the subscribe button. And if you like what you see, please give it a like. That would mean a lot to me. And if you're wondering why I'm wearing Hawaiian shirts, well, when I'm not talking about records, I'm talking about my other love, Tiki. I have a show called Tiki with Ray. If you want to check that show out, just search Tiki with Ray on YouTube. It'll come up.